So today I want to go over a weapon build for a weapon that's always been in a bit of a weird position, even though it's always been very fun to use, especially as you get later into the end game. And that's the HK416. Now, one of the main reasons this has always been in such a weird position is because it's always been a slightly worse M4. Even back in the day at like reserve times when everything was a laser beam and this weapon was very usable, it was still never as good as the M4 because you just couldn't get as good as stats, even though the stats were pretty close. But one of the big differences between this and an M4 is this has 850 RPM, M4 has 800 RPM. And in Escape from Tarkov, higher RPM weapons usually are much harder to control. That's why when previous to this wipe, when the last handful of wipes have had pretty ridiculous recoil, things like the UMP have been so widely used because it's a low RPM weapon and makes it much more controllable. But with a big recoil overhaul, this weapon is controllable even though you spray out bullets so much faster that you'll probably want to wait till later on to use this, or until you can at least buy M855 and just spray out super cheap ammo. So starting off, we're going to have a sight. You can use whatever sight you want, and since this is 5.56, you can use super long range sights. 5.56 are one of the most accurate rounds in the game with really high muzzle velocities. So if you're doing a normal match in a more long range map, you're probably going to want to be using a variable zoom scope. Then we're going to have an MBus Gen 2 front and rear sights, either color you want. Those are just going to give some additional ergo. Then we're going to have the Midwest Industries 9-inch M-Lock handguard. Then we're going to have the AR-15 Avalanche charging handle. This is going to give like 3 additional ergo compared to the normal charging handle, so that's actually a pretty big upgrade. Then we're going to be using the 14.5-inch barrel. This makes this weapon a bit shorter. You have 2 longer barrels in the 16.5-inch and the 20-inch. Now 16.5-inch is pretty similar to this. You're going to get a little less ergo, but you're going to have a little less recoil. So 16.5 or 14.5, they're both pretty similar. The 20-inch is where a weapon like this gets a bit ridiculous. It gets so long. So if you're going to be using this on a long range map, we're not going to be fighting through doorways or anything like that. A 20-inch can definitely be good for those longer range fights. You may also not want to use a 60 rounder if you're using a 20-inch barrel because it's going to have a lot less ergo. Then for the stock, we're going to be using the HK enhanced buffer tube. On that, we're going to be using the AR-15 Mo carbine stock. Then on that, we're going to have the Mo butt pad. And again, like most of these best builds, this combination is going to give you the best mix of ergo and recoil. Then for the mags, you have so many mags for 5.56, but if you're going to want to be using the 60 rounder, you're going to want to be using the round Magpul P mags. The thick silver mags that are also 60 rounders are going to give you less ergo, but they can usually be cheaper to get. Or if you're just wanting to use 30 rounders, you're going to get a lot more ergo, so you can kind of change your build around that. You can also get 40 round mags, which are kind of the in-between between the 30s and 60s. They give a lot more ergo, but you do need to have specific rigs to get the 40 rounders in them, but 40 rounders are usually actually a really good choice. Then for the pistol grip, you're going to be using the HK ergo, or you're going to be using the Growl S. Both give the same amount of stats, so choose whichever one is going to be cheaper. And then for the grip, we're going to be having the M-Lock 4.1-inch rail. On that, we're going to have the Stark SE5 foregrip. Again, just the best mix of ergo and recoil reduction. Now, if you're using, say, a 40 round mag or even a 30 round mag, you may be able to get away with using a Zenit RK2. Gives you less recoil, but massively reduces your ergo. If you're dropping down from the 60 rounder, it may actually be worth it. And then for the tactical device, we're going to be using the M-Lock rail. And on that, any tactical device you want to use, I just use a Baltar Pro because it's cheap and comes with a flashlight and laser combination. Then finally, for the muzzle device and silencer, we're going to be using the AR-15 Silencer Co. ASR flash hider. And then on that, we're going to be using the Silencer Co. Saker sound suppressor. Going to be basically the best sound suppressor you can get. And in Escape from Tarkov, especially right now, I think any meta build you're going to be using, you're probably going to want to be using a suppressor. Going loud really isn't as viable these days. But that's the entirety of the build for the HK416. And like I mentioned, this isn't really going to be as good as a fully built M4, but it's incredibly fun to use and it's still pretty usable. Has 46 ergo, 66 vertical recoil with a 60 rounder in it, and it's not a super long rifle, so I think it's pretty usable. And with that 850 RPM, it's just generally pretty fun to use, especially if you're using like cheaper ammo or if you're super late into the wipe and you just have as much ammo as you want. Being able to just spray at a super high RPM is just going to be really fun. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.